It was a quiet suburban neighborhood where life moved at its own steady pace. Sarah and Adil had been married for 7 years. To everyone around them, they were the perfect couple. Adil worked long hours at a reputable firm, and Sarah had her own small business selling handcrafted jewelry. Their relationship seemed like a well-oiled machine, but beneath the surface, cracks were beginning to show. Adil's work had become his life. Long hours at the office meant late nights and weekends spent away from home. Sarah felt lonely and disconnected, longing for the days when they would sit together for hours, talking about their dreams. Her jewelry business gave her some solace, but the emotional void was growing too large to ignore. One day, at a local art fair, Sarah met someone. His name was Zane, a freelance photographer with a warm smile and an easy charm. He took an interest in her work, and they struck up a conversation that lasted hours. For the first time in years, Sarah felt seen and appreciated. Their friendship grew quickly, with Zane frequently visiting her shop, offering to photograph her designs for her website. Each meeting became an excuse for Sarah to spend more time with him. Adil, on the other hand, was also struggling in his own way. At work, he had grown close to a colleague named Aisha. She was intelligent, witty, and always seemed to understand him. They began having lunches together, sharing stories about their lives. It started innocently, but over time, their bond deepened. Adil found himself confiding in Aisha about his marital frustrations, something he had never dared to do with Sarah. The emotional distance between Sarah and Adil widened. They lived under the same roof but barely spoke, each preoccupied with their own secret. One evening, Sarah told Adil she had a late meeting with a client. In reality, she was meeting Zane for dinner. Adil, claiming he had a work event, spent the evening with Aisha instead. Both of them knew, deep down, that they were treading dangerous waters, but neither had the courage to confront the other or themselves. The breaking point came when Sarah accidentally left her phone unlocked on the kitchen counter. A message from Zane flashed on the screen, and Adil saw it. The words were harmless on the surface, but the tone was unmistakable. Adil felt a wave of betrayal, but didn't confront her immediately. Instead, he began paying closer attention to her actions, his own guilt gnawing at him. One night, after weeks of mounting tension, Adil finally brought it up. They sat across from each other, their living room filled with an unbearable silence. Sarah didn't deny her emotional connection with Zane, but she turned the accusation back on Adil, mentioning the late nights and the change in his behavior. It wasn't long before Aisha's name came up. The argument escalated, both of them hurt and defensive, until they finally admitted the truth. In the aftermath, they realized they had a choice to make. The love they once shared hadn't entirely disappeared, but it was buried under layers of resentment, unspoken words, and unmet needs. Both Sarah and Adil knew that their relationship couldn't continue as it was. They had to decide whether to rebuild the trust they had broken or go their separate ways. It wasn't easy, but they chose to try. Together, they sought counseling and started to communicate more openly. The process was slow and painful, filled with setbacks, but it also brought moments of clarity and understanding. While they couldn't erase the past, they began to forge a new path, learning to see each other not as the perfect partners they once pretended to be, but as flawed individuals willing to grow together. As the weeks turned into months, Sarah and Adil gradually found themselves navigating uncharted territory. Therapy sessions were grueling at times, forcing them to confront not only their own actions, but also the deeper issues that had led them down this path. They learned that the cheating wasn't the root problem, but a symptom of years of neglect, unexpressed frustrations, and unmet emotional needs. Sarah realized how much she had longed for validation, not just as a wife, but as an individual. Adil, buried under the weight of professional pressures, had failed to notice her silent cries for attention. Similarly, Adil came to terms with his own struggles. He acknowledged how he had sought comfort in Aisha, not because he didn't love Sarah, but because he didn't know how to express his feelings of inadequacy and exhaustion to her. The hardest part was rebuilding trust. Sarah often found herself questioning Adil's late-night meetings, while Adil struggled to believe Sarah's explanations about her work trips. There were moments of relapse into old patterns, where doubts and suspicions threatened to undo all their progress. But each time, they reminded themselves of their commitment to try, even if it meant falling and starting again. One evening, as they sat on the balcony after dinner, Sarah broke the silence. She spoke about Zayn for the first time in months, not to defend her actions, but to explain what she had felt at the time. Adil listened, his fists clenched, but he didn't interrupt. When she finished, he opened up about Aisha, sharing the vulnerability he had felt and how easy it was to slip into a space where he didn't feel judged. It wasn't an easy conversation, but it was an honest one. They realized that for the first time in years, they were truly talking, not as husband and wife trying to maintain a facade, but as two people willing to face their flaws. To rekindle their connection, they started small. Weekend coffee dates replaced the silence that once filled their home. They revisited old memories, photo albums from their early years, the cafe where they had their first date, the beach where Adil had proposed. These gestures didn't erase the pain, but they reminded them of the foundation their relationship was built on. Gradually, laughter returned to their conversations. Sarah found joy in sharing her creative process with Adil, and Adil began to lean on Sarah for support during challenging days at work. They learned to set boundaries. Adil limited his late-night work, while Sarah redefined her relationships with friends and colleagues to avoid blurred lines. Both made an effort to be more present, physically and emotionally. The journey was far from perfect, but it was theirs. They knew the scars of betrayal would always be a part of their story, but they also knew they had a choice: to let those scars define their future or to use them as reminders of how far they had come. They chose the latter. By the time their 8th anniversary arrived, the wounds had begun to heal. Over dinner that night, Adil reached for Sarah's hand. "We've been through hell," he said, his voice steady, "but I'm glad we chose to fight for this." Sarah squeezed his hand, her eyes brimming with tears. "Me too," she whispered, "because for the first time in a long time, I feel like we're really us again." Their story wasn't about perfection or fairy tale endings. It was about resilience, forgiveness, and the willingness to rebuild something broken. It wasn't easy, but it was real, and that, they both realized, was worth everything.